everyone, Jasmine here from Feeling Nifty Painting Tutorials. Today you're going to learn how to paint this easy beach painting for beginners with some pretty seafoam wave patterns, some waves in the distance, and a bumpy sandy beach with some nifty texture in it, and followed by a cute starfish on the beach shore. You can also access the full free written step-by-step tutorial on my site. Check out the description below for the link. And if you also enjoy easy beginner level painting tutorials like this one, be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification to know when I publish new videos. All right, let's get started. So the first step is we're going to be taking a piece of masking tape and we're just going to put it on our horizon line, and that's going to help us get a really crisp and straight line without worrying too much about brushwork. And also in terms of composition, I'm leaving the top third for the sky, and then the middle third for the ocean, and then the bottom third for the sand. So I'm just going to take my masking tape here, and I've also gone ahead and pre-measured just to make sure it's nice and even on both sides. And I'll take my masking tape here and I'm just going to lay it down and wrap it around the sides. Now in terms of brushes, I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch flat brush and then a size 8 flat brush. Now different companies have different sizing, so if you have a slightly smaller flat brush than your 3/4 inch, that would work. And I'm going to be using 2 round brushes, one size 5, which is kind of like a small to medium round brush, and a really tiny round brush, which here is 2/0. And this is going to help us create those really intricate seafoam waves webbing that we have that's kind of coming onto shore. Okay, so now that we have our masking tape down, we're going to take our 3/4 inch flat brush and we're going to wet the bristles just a bit in water. And I'm just going to take out the excess water on the side of the water jar. We don't want too much water on our brush, otherwise it's going to create some water droplets on our canvas, and we don't want that. So the first color we're going to pick up is our ultramarine blue. So I'm just going to take my flat brush and I'm just going to work it into the bristles so it's nice and evenly loaded. And then I'm going to take it, we want the darkest portion of the sky at the top, so we're just going to lay our ultramarine blue with these back and forth strokes right at the top of our canvas. And then we're going to reload it just a tiny bit. And then we're going to pick up white because we want it to be a little bit lighter towards the horizon. Oh, I grabbed a little bit too much there. Okay, so that's a nice dark coat at the top. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to clean off our brush because we're going to blend the blue and the white right on our canvas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the white right on the edge of the flat brush, and I'm going to then just use that and blend it into the sky, on the canvas. So you can see the blue and the white is actually mixing right on canvas, and which is going to be easier to create those blends. And then you can move your way up to the top, so there's no distinct line where there's that ultramarine blue and then that white and blue mix. So we want those blends nice and even. So we're going to use that same back and forth stroke. You're going to move all the way up to the top, and then you're going to go all the way down to the bottom until you don't have any paint left on your paintbrush, so you can see the scratchy strokes, and that's the time to reload your brush with more of that white paint. So we're going to grab a little bit more of that white on our brush, and we're going to continue where we left off. And you can see it's getting even lighter as we pick up more light. There's less blue on the brush and more white. And that's the look we're going for, kind of like that gradient where it's darker to medium to really light. So we want to, when working with blends, you always want to blend up so there's no distinct color blocks, and then you want to work your way down. So I'm going to work up to make sure that it's nice and blended. And then I'm going to go back down until I don't have any paint left on my brush. And as you can see, the blends and the strokes are smoothing out. Okay, I'm going to pick up a little bit more of that white on my brush And I'm going to pick up where I left off. And as you can see near the horizon now, it's almost like a white. And that's going to look really nice because the horizon, when we paint in the ocean, it's going to be really dark right there at that line. And it's going to be that dark ocean meeting that really nice white light sky. So it's going to give us a nice contrast. So we're going to move our way up to make sure those blends are nice and smooth and there's no distinct line. And then we're going to go back down. And you can keep on working the paint. As long as the paint is wet, you're able to blend it and smooth out those strokes. But as soon as it starts to dry, that's when it becomes really tricky to work it. Now, one trick I sometimes use is using a spray water bottle. So if you find your paint is getting a little tacky and dry, you can just use a spritz of the water and it kind of reactivates the paint and you can continue to work it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove our masking tape from our canvas. And that's going to give us a really nice, beautiful, crisp horizon line. So now we know that our ocean is going to start at this line. So it gives us a nice guideline there. So talking about oceans, we're going to now continue on with the next step, which is starting with our ocean. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our flat brush that we used for the sky, and we're going to pick up a little bit more ultramarine blue. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use the flat brush's flat chiseled edge to get as close to that horizon line as we can. And we don't have to worry here about getting it perfect, even if it's a little bit uneven. That's fine, because at the end, the very last step, we're going to do something that makes it clean across. So right now we just want to get as close as we can just to cover that white. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that chiseled edge and you're going to sweep it across. And flat brushes are amazing at creating and cutting around corners, creating these horizon lines because it has that sharp chiseled edge. So once we've done that, now it's going to be much easier just to fill in our ocean because we know where that horizon line is and it's already filled out. Okay, so we're going to pick up just a little bit more of that ultramarine blue to make sure our brush is nice and loaded. And we're going to paint in the top portion of our ocean, which is going to be the darkest. So again, we're going to try using those back and forth strokes. You can go a little slowly here because we're trying to keep it within that horizon line. There we go. Now, ultramarine blue, the color of it is going to, the nature of that ultramarine blue color is actually a little bit transparent, meaning you're going to see the canvas below it on the first layer versus having mixed in with white. White is an opaque color, so when you mix opaque with any color, even a transparent one, it covers usually on the first coat. But here, ultramarine blue on its own is fairly transparent, so we're going to need more layers to make it more opaque, which we're going to do later on. So right now, don't worry about if you see the brush strokes and you see some of the canvas still popping through. Don't worry about that right now. We're going to add some coats later on to fill that out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pick up some of our titanium white, and we're not cleaning off our brush again. We're leaving whatever ultramarine blue we have on our brush, and we're just going to blend that color just like we did for our sky. But it's going to be a little bit darker than our sky here because we're still working far in the distant ocean. So we want it to be a little bit darker than that sky, that really light sky color. So we're going to move our brush into those back and forth strokes, and we're going to try to blend it at the top as well so it's no distinct color blocks and it's nice and blended. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pick up some of our phthalo green because we want some variations. Oceans are not just one flat color of blue. There's different hues of blue. There's this type of blue, and then there's some blue greens, turquoise, and aqua. So we're going to bring all of those into our ocean. So we're going to pick up some of this phthalo green on our brush, and we're not cleaning it off. We want all of the colors to mix and blend on canvas. So we're just going to pick up some of that phthalo green, and we're going to, right where we left off with that ocean blue color, we're going to add that phthalo green on. And it's going to be really dark and intense, but we're going to lighten it in just a moment with our white. We just want to add some of that really nice, beautiful green into our ocean right now. Okay, and now we're going to pick up some titanium white, and we're just going to blend it at the bottom, those back and forth horizontal strokes. So you can see, and it's okay if some of the blue comes through on canvas here as well. It's nice to get variations and different colors and different streaks in our ocean. So you can see here it lightened that phthalo green right up, and it becomes more of like an aqua seafoam color. I love that color. Okay, so now we're going to go back into our ultramarine blue. So we're going to pick up some ultramarine blue, and we're going to add it right below where we left off. It's going to be darker, but we're going to lighten it even more with our white once it's on our canvas. So we're going to put some ultramarine blue on, and then we're going to take some white and go right over top of it. And we basically, our goal here is to get this blue lighter than that blue back and towards the horizon. So you can keep on adding more white to your mix. So if it's still looking pretty much the same level as that blue there, so I'm going to add a little bit more white to lighten it even more. Okay, so that looks much lighter than that blue there, so I'm happy with that. And then we're going to finish off this ocean portion because we want to leave the bottom third for our sand. We're going to finish off the bottom portion with our phthalo green, because when we mix that phthalo green and that sand color, it's going to create a really beautiful warm green that's going to come below the waves, and it's going to see, you're going to see it right below those waves that are crashing on the shore, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful. So we're going to pick up some of that phthalo green on our brush, and we're going to continue where we left off with that blue. We're just going to add that phthalo green on. I'm going to blend it into that blue as best as we can. And you want to make sure you have about a third of your canvas still there, still left that's blank. And we're going to add some white now to lighten it up. So we want this phthalo green to be lighter than that phthalo green. I'm going to pick up some more white. It's beautiful. Call the tropical waters Windex colored waters because it has that really nice Windex color, aqua blue, green color to it, and it's just absolutely beautiful. All right, so I'm happy with that. This one is slightly lighter than that green. So in the end for our ocean, we're going to have our blue that's slightly darker, that's moving into that greenish color, back to that blue that's even lighter, and back to that green that's even lighter. So that's going to be our variation of our ocean for our first layer. Now we're going to continue on to the next step, which is painting in our sand. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush right now. And also, we're going to be blending that sand color into that blue. So we don't want the paint to dry too much on our canvas. So if you have a spray bottle with water, right, what you can do right now is you can actually spray it with some water. Just a couple of sprays, you don't need too much. And that's going to keep it from drying out too fast because we're going to go ahead and mix our sand color now. Now, if you don't have a spray bottle, that's totally fine. And if it dries on you, that's okay because we can add in a little bit more of that phthalo green later on to get that color on to blend it with the sand color. Okay, so the next step is we're going to create our sand color. And to do that, we're going to grab two paint colors. We're going to use cadmium yellow medium. And we're just going to add a dollop of it. like that. Okay, and then we're gonna grab our burnt umber. So if you don't have cadmium yellow medium and burnt umber, you can try to use any yellow, any brown you have at home already, and try to mix the same sand color. I always suggest trying to use what you have at home before going out to buy brand new tubes of paint, because it's cheaper for you and also it wastes less. And also we're gonna need some titanium white. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my palette knife and just move over some of this titanium white over here. And now we're gonna mix the three colors together. So here for the paint mix, there's slightly more of the cadmium yellow than the brown, and then a pretty decent size amount of your white. But we can always adjust the white as we go, because it's hard to kind of gauge sometimes how light it's going to be. So we just want to have that nice sandy brown color to begin with, and then we can start playing around with adding more white. It's looking really nice and warm. Nice warm sand that's been kissed by the sun. That's beautiful. All right, so we need definitely more white there. Just gonna clean off my palette knife. I don't want to get any of that yellow into the white. There we go. I'm gonna try to lighten that up as much as we can until we're happy with the color. And also another thing to note is with acrylic colors, especially if you're using the student grade ones, they are going to dry a couple of shades darker than when it's wet. So when you're trying to mix your color, I always try to add it a couple of shades lighter when it's wet. That way when it's darker, it's going to dry the shade that I really wanted it at. You don't get that difference in color, drying color with the higher quality paints as much, but with student quality and some even the level ones, sometimes you'll get that variation between when it's dry and wet. Okay, so that's a really nice sand color. I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some of that sand color on my brush, my flat brush, and I'm going to come back here into where we left off with that green, that phthalo green color, and I'm going to try to blend that paint out. And because I had added the water on it, it has kept it, sprayed that water on it, it's kept it a little bit wet, so I'm able to blend it out a little bit there. As you can see, it's creating a really nice, beautiful, warm green. And that's going to show through in our sand and our water waves that are crashing on the shore later on. It's going to look absolutely beautiful. All right. So now for the bottom portion, I want to make sure none of that green gets mixed up here. We want that pure sand color. So I'm going to go ahead, because I picked up some of that green on my brush, I want it completely clean so I can add a nice layer of that sand. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse off my brush and make sure there's no color left on it. Okay, good, nice and clean. And we're going to pick up some more of that sand color and we're going to apply it at the bottom. I would love to be at a beach right about now. You can take it a little bit up here to make sure the blends are nice and smooth between the transitions. Okay. Very nice. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and rinse off that brush. Make sure it's nice and clean. All right, so now we're going to have a little bit of fun with our sand. Now this part is optional, so you definitely don't have to do it. But when I was making this painting, I thought it'd be so nifty to add in some sand texture to our sand portion. And they definitely do sell paint mediums, which you can mix in with your paints to give you that bumpy, sandy like texture. But they're often really expensive, and you can't really control how bumpy the texture gets. But another thing I discovered was just using simple salt. Everyone has this in their kitchen, and it's pretty inexpensive, and it works. And you can actually control the amount of texture that you get in your paint. All you have to do is take that salt and sprinkle it. So our paint is still wet here. We want it to be wet, and we're gonna sprinkle that salt. If it's not, if your paint below is not wet, that's okay too, because we're gonna seal it afterwards with another coat of that sand color, so not to worry. So what you want to do is you just want to sprinkle that salt right on your canvas, wherever you want it. You can add as much or as little as you'd like. You cannot do it wrong here at all. Adding texture is such a fun thing to do because it's so everyone does it so differently, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. So now what we're going to do is the salt is on our canvas, but now we want to seal it, because even if the paint is wet and we leave it to dry now, some of the salt, once it's dry, could flake off if we don't seal it with another layer of paint. So we're just going to pick up our same flat brush, grab a little bit more of that sand color, and we're just going to go over it. And that salt is going to move, which is totally fine, because the texture has kind of a mind of its own, and it's going to go where it wants to go. So just work with that. And you're going to notice it's going to start giving a really beautiful, the texture is going to come out even more when you apply the paint. And I'm going to give you a close-up of this once I'm done, so you can see it on camera. I'm just going to add a little bit more. I absolutely love textures. I'm a little texture obsessed. So when I was doing this painting, I'm like, the first thing I'm like, we need to add that texture to the sand. All right. So it's simple as that. Now, when this dries, the sand is going to be stuck on your canvas and it's not going to flake off. So I'm going to just clean off my brush in water so the paint doesn't get a chance to dry on our brush. And I'm going to show you up close what this looks like. You can see it gives a really, really beautiful texture, and it's bumpy and sandy, and it actually looks like sand. If you don't want to use salt, you can actually, and you do have access to sand, you can always try that. I haven't personally tried the sand. I've just experimented with the salt, which ends up working really well. All right, now we're going to wait for the sand color to dry, but we can actually move back into the ocean at this point. Now my ocean is dry, which is fine, and if yours is not and it's still a bit tacky, that's fine. We can still continue on to this next step. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a second layer on top of our ocean, and we're going to do it with a different tone of blue-green, because right now there's that ultramarine blue with the phthalo green, which is beautiful with that little bit of white. But when we mix both the phthalo green and the ultramarine blue with the white, it's going to create a really beautiful turquoise color. And so we're going to add some of that turquoise in our ocean. So there's little pools of that everywhere and a little bit of sections of it, because when you look at ocean, you're going to see all those different blues together, and that's what's going to give it that beauty. So we're going to take our palette knife and we're just going to grab a little bit of the ultramarine blue into another pile. Actually, I grabbed a little bit too much. And then we're going to grab a little bit of the phthalo green. You want a little bit, actually more of that phthalo green than the blue, so I'm just going to remove some of that. All right, and then to that, we're going to add in some titanium white. We're just going to add a little bit to begin with, and then we can always add more when we see what the blends look, or what the color looks like. So now we're just going to mix it all together. Going to start creating a really nice turquoise blue-green color. Now, if you find your color is looking a little gray and dull, I would go and add a little bit more of the phthalo green to your mix, and that's going to bring back a little bit of that vibrant green. Okay, it's really nice. So now I'm going to grab a little bit more of my white, because that's gonna dry a little bit darker than that color right now, and I want it to be really nice and light. So it gives a little bit more contrast in our ocean. That's really nice. Okay, I'm gonna add a smidgen more of that phthalo green. Get that out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our smaller flat brush here, and we're going to use it with a dry brushing method, meaning it's going to be dry, your bristles. So you don't want to wet it in any water. If it is wet, just dry it off as best as you can with a paper towel and get all the moisture out as best as you can. And then you're just going to pick up some paint right on your brush. And we're going to dry brush. We don't want too much paint. You don't want big dollops of it. You just want a little bit on. And then we're just going to drag it across like that. And you can see with the dry brushing, it's kind of scratchy and wispy, which is the look we want. We don't want those opaque marks, because we want some of that ocean color below it to kind of come through. And it's going to be more subtle that way. So you're just going to add a few pockets or pools of that beautiful light aqua green or turquoise in different places. You can have fun here. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. You can actually use your chiseled edge too, because when you're looking at it from a distance, you're going to have the bigger pools that are closer to the shore, and then as you move to the distance, the pools are going to be smaller and thinner. So you can actually use the chiseled edge of your brush when you get really close to the horizon to create smaller pools like that. And if you find they look a little bit too like stark and they stick out too much, what you could do is you can grab just a simple paper towel and you can smooth those out. So here what I do is the paint is still wet, so I'm going to take that little bit of paper towel and I'm just going to smooth them out a bit. So they're not quite they don't stand out as much. They're more subtle. So that's a little trick you can do too. Just have fun here and add them wherever you feel like it at the moment. Sometimes with painting, it can get really structured, especially when you're following tutorials, and then you don't have that kind of leeway of just going with the flow, and because you're just following steps. So it's always nice to have that in a painting where you just kind of add them ad hoc and you're not thinking too much, because that's where the beauty is, and you just kind of get taken away in the process. So take a few minutes here and add in some more of those pools with that aqua blue color, and then we're going to come back to the next step. Now I'm going to be going quiet while I fill in the rest of my pools here, and I'm going to play some nice relaxing music. All right, for the next step, we want to make sure that our sand color is dried because we're going to be adding in our waves with our white. So if it's not dried yet, what you want to do is you want to test it out. And if it lifts on your finger and it's a bit tacky, it's still wet. So you would just wait till it's dried, and then we're going to come back to the next step. So now that our sand color paint is dried and our ocean is dried to the touch, we're going to move on to creating our ocean wave. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our medium size round brush. We're not going to pick up the smaller one. We're going to pick up the slightly larger one. And we're going to load it on with some white, titanium white paint. Now I've actually thinned this paint down. All I've done is I've added a spray of water, and I've mixed it in with a palette knife, because I find that working with like a really nice thinner paint consistency when making those really small, thin, smooth lines works better than having that thick, goopy paint consistency. So if you want, this is optional, you can add in a little bit of water. You can even just add drops of it with your brush and then make it a nice, smooth paint consistency, like kind of like gravy. And so I'm going to pick up that white, titanium white paint on my brush, and I'm going to be loading it with a twisting motion so my tip stays nice and sharp, and that's what's going to give us that control and getting those nice smooth waves. So we're going to start a few inches above the bottom of the canvas, and we're just going to start painting in our wave. So you can paint in your wave in any shape you feel like here. Just go with the flow, just like our waves. There we go. You can always add in a little bit more white to make it pop, but we're actually going to come back and thicken it back up later. So as long as we have our wave shape, we're good to go. Now we're going to do the fun part where we're going to be creating some wave seafoam shapes of our water. So the way I approached it is I took a look at some patterns of what water looks like, and this was a fairly easy one to replicate because they're basically really like squiggly shapes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our titanium white and we're going to create those really squiggly lines. And then those shapes are going to come out as we kind of paint them in and we connect them. And also to notice too that they're going to be larger, these shapes, towards the shore. And as you move further out towards the ocean, they're going to get smaller. And that's also going to give us that illusion of depth. So keep that in mind when we're painting that in. Now I'm going to add a copy of this picture on the written step-by-step tutorial on my blog. So just take a look at the description below, and if you want to follow along with this picture. All right, so we're going to continue on with this same brush and load it in with some nice white paint. And to start things off, we're going to be creating, so I'm going to go back, refer back to the picture. We're going to be creating our line, our squiggly lines moving vertically right now. And then we're going to connect them all horizontally later. So we're going to be creating these squiggly lines going up in our ocean. So you're just going to take your brush, and we're going to, also the wave is kind of crashing on the shore, kind of coming in from our ocean and crashing out, spreading out. So we're going to be painting in those squiggly lines coming in an angle, kind of going towards the center. And that's going to give us the illusion of depth too. So we're going to take our paintbrush and we're just going to paint in these really cool squiggly lines. To make it even more random, you can actually just kind of jiggle your brush a bit as you're painting them in, and that's going to create another kind of variation of how they look, because we don't want them to look all equal and all the same. We want a nice variation of what their shapes look like. So these, on this side, the squiggly lines are going to be pointing towards the center, and on this side it's going to be pointing the other way. So we're going to keep that in mind when we do this. I'll load my paintbrush with more water. Paint. Okay. And some of them don't even have to be connected to the bottom. We can have some that are kind of coming out and have a life of their own. That. Go. Okay. So now that we've created our first initial wave pattern, we're going to come and try to connect them in between, because as you can see back to the picture, they're all, if we did these squiggly lines here, they're all connected. And then when you connect them all, that's when these little pools of water show through and you have that seafoam pattern. So now we're going to add those horizontal connecting lines. So we're just going to add them. And also too, it's nice to give a variation. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to switch over to a smaller brush later to give us really fine lines when we move closer, further away into the ocean, to give us also the illusion of depth. So you're just going to connect these lines together. Some of them you can make thicker, some thinner lines. And to make the thinner lines, you just apply a really light pressure to your brush, like almost just the tip touching the canvas. And to make the thicker lines, you apply a little bit of a heavier pressure down on your bristles. That's the trick with brushes. You don't need too many of them to get different variation of strokes. You just have to vary your pressure that you add on your brush. So a lighter pressure gets you smaller strokes, and a heavier pressure gives you a little bit bigger strokes. So you can see already those patterns are emerging. This part is super relaxing because it's so random and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And so sit back, enjoy and relax this and enjoy this part. So once you're happy with the amount of pattern that you've added to your wave, we're going to go in and add even more finer details using a smaller round brush. So pick up the smallest round brush you have, and we're going to moisten it in water, and then pick up some of our thin down white paint. And we're going to use that twisting motion so the tip stays really nice and sharp. And we're going to come in and we're going to add a little bit more finer details, kind of like webbing that's coming off in a horizontal fashion off some of these thicker lines more towards the ocean. So that's going to give us, because as we move out towards the ocean, things get finer and smaller, and that gives us the illusion of depth. So we're going to start adding those small squiggly fine lines and make even more of those patterns. And also too, you can add, because the wave doesn't just end right there, there's still movement happening in the ocean. So you can add some really small, fine lines right at the top of where those squiggly lines are going. And that's going to give us that really smooth transition from that wave into more calmer waters. And an interesting thing about waves is there's different types. So there's waves that are further away in the ocean that are created by the wind, and then the ones that are especially happening at that tide time that are created by that gravitation between the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun. Add a little, and you want that same movement where it's kind of coming, it's coming from that kind of like a center point, and just it's being pushed out. And that's going to give us that really beautiful movement of our wave. This pattern is almost like a web. It's very, very interesting. I love the patterns that are in nature, the natural patterns that are in our natural world. They're just, it's so amazing to see what nature has, the beauty nature has created. So you can already see it's creating that illusion now of depth, with those waves kind of faint in the background, and they're getting slightly bigger as we move out. All right, now that you've added in some smaller waves at the back and added in some tiny details with our small brown brush, we're going to now come in and we're going to emphasize this edge of this wave. And even if your wave is still wet, that's totally fine here as well. So if it's a little bit wet or tacky, we can still continue on to this step. So we're going to grab our slightly larger round brush, and we're going to grab some of the titanium white paint, load it on our brush with that twisting motion. And we're going to come here and we're going to emphasize and make this edge of this wave a little bit thicker by using circular motion. So we're going to be pretending like we're brushing in circles along this wave edge. That's going to give us that really frothy, foamy, that wave crashing onto the shore look. I'm going to pick up more paint. So we're using that circular motion. It's giving that nice frothy, foamy wave look. And some of that sand or the texture might be there too, but that's fine because it's going to add to that beauty of that foamy texture and the sand kind of getting caught at the edge of the wave. Zoom out now. So that wave really is brought to life now when we just thickened up the edge of the border and added that circular like frothy foam pattern. And you can keep on going over it if you find you want a little bit more brighter white, more opaque, because sometimes the paint can go on pretty thin. You can keep on working that until you're happy. Wait for our crest of our wave to dry, we're going to move back into the ocean and we're going to create some distant waves in the back of our ocean. So to do that, we need some titanium white on our palette, and we're going to be picking up our smaller flat brush, and we're going to make sure it's nice and moist by dipping it in water and then picking up some of that titanium white paint on our brush. And we want to make sure that there is, so you're going to just kind of shake it a bit in that titanium white paint because we want to make sure that there is white at the edge of the chiseled edge of the flat brush, because we're going to be using it to create the top of our waves. So once our brush is fully loaded with that titanium white, we're going to start creating our wave. So we're just going to start out by picking an area that you want to have your wave. So I'm going to put my first one here, and we're just going to be using that chiseled edge, and we're going to be dragging it across to create a horizontal line, much like we did with the horizon. So we're just going to start the wave there, and then we're just going to drag across. And that's going to be the top of our wave. Now for the water that splashes down from the top of that wave, all we're simply going to do is take our brush, again at the chiseled edge, and we're going to leave about a couple of centimeters from the end. So we want that line at the end, and we're just going to put our brush at the edge and then just sweep down a bit like that. And then we're going to move over, and then we're going to sweep down even more. Basically, we are going to be creating a triangle shape here. So as we move towards the center of our wave, you're going to be sweeping down even more. And then in the center, it's going to be the lowest point. And then as you move your way out to the right, you're going to be sweeping down a little bit less. So we're going to be creating that nice triangle shape. You can always reload your brush with paint when you run out. And we want to leave still the ends of the wave without any of those sweeps down, because we want that line there. That's the end of our waves. And you can just come back in and add it where there's no white paint. And then another trick I like to do is grabbing a Q-tip. So I like to grab a Q-tip, and I like to soften the edges of our wave a bit while it's still wet. So it just creates a nice soft edge. Now if your paint is a little bit dry, you can come back in here and add a little bit more of your white paint, making sure to keep that triangular shape. That. And then we can just soften it out. There we go. Creates a nice soft wave with that water spraying down. There we go. Now we're going to be creating another wave. I'm going to create my other one over here. So same thing, I'm going to take the chiseled edge, make sure there's enough paint on my chiseled edge of the brush, and I'm just going to add a horizontal line. like that. And I'm going to start a couple centimeters from the end of that line, and I'm going to drag my paint down into a triangle shape with the longest part of the wave at the bottom, and leaving still about a centimeter or two at the end. And I'm just going to add a little bit more white. It's nice and thick. And I'm going to come back with my Q-tip, and I'm just going to soften those edges with a circular motion. Like that. Now if you find you've painted, you don't have a lot of that line at the end showing, you just go back in and add a little bit more. Like that. That's looking great. Okay, I think I'm going to add one more at the top over here. So I'm going to load my brush with that titanium white paint, making sure there's paint at that chiseled edge. And I'm going to draw the top of the wave again. And this one I'm going to make a little smaller, because as we mentioned before, things in the distance are often smaller, and that creates that illusion of depth. So this one I'm going to create a little bit narrower wave. And now we're going to take our brush and we're going to drag down to create that triangular shape. So, and I'm going to add in a little bit at the edges like that. And now I'm going to take my Q-tip and I'm going to soften those edges out like that. There we go. And that completes our ocean waves in the distance. Now we're going to keep that same brush and we're going to add some really fine, faint waves in the horizon. And those are just going to be straight, small lines. So we're going to grab our brush, add some titanium white paint on it, and we're just going to create some really fine waves in the background. And these are going to be much smaller because they're further away from our eye. Come back and we're going to finish off this wave by adding a little shadow at the bottom of this white crust wave at the bottom here at the shore. So to do that, we want to make sure that the white portion of this wave is fully dried before we add the shadow. So if your wave is not dried yet, you can use your finger test to make sure it's not tacky and it's not coming off in your finger. But if it's still wet, you want to pause the video here and then continue it once it's fully dried. Now, once it is fully dried, we're going to create the shadow color. And to do that, we're going to be adding some burnt umber with our white. So you just need a really, really tiny bit because it's going to be a really small line along that wave. I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm going to take a little bit of that white and that brown and we're going to mix it. Becomes a light brown color. So we're going to pick up our smallest round brush. So you're basically going to be adding a really thin line along the bottom edge of that wave. So you start out at one end and we're just going to be adding a really, really thin line, and it's just going to cast a little bit of a shadow right below that wave. I'm going to give our wave a little bit more dimension. And there we go. So it kind of pops, that wave kind of pops out now with the shadow below it. I'll go ahead and wash off that brush, clean it off. Put it down. And the final step, or actually the second final step of our painting, is to create our starfish. So what I like to do here is I like to draw it or sketch it in with a pencil first. You can definitely go ahead and paint it in directly, but I always prefer to work with a sketch. So to draw in a starfish, you just take your pencil here, and I'm going to trace in that starfish shape. And starfishes, they're pretty much the shape of a star, but they have rounded corners, so they're not pointed like the traditional star shape. So I'm pretty much happy with that shape. So I'm going to put my pencil down, and we're going to be painting it in with some cadmium red medium. So I'm going to be putting that on my palette, just a little bit, because we just need a tiny bit for that starfish. That should be good. And I'm also going to put in some burnt umber, if I can find it. There we go. I'm going to put in some burnt umber on my palette as well, because we're going to be using that to shade in the starfish, so it looks three-dimensional and not flat. Okay. Just going to grab my palette knife here. So I'm going to take a little bit of my red there, and I'm going to take a little bit of that burnt umber, and I'm going to darken my red, and that's going to be our shadow on the side of our starfish. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our smallest round brush, and we're going to make sure the bristles are wet, and then we're going to pick up a little bit of the cadmium red medium, not the darker one, but the one that's straight out of the bottle or tube. And we're going to paint in our starfish. I'm going to clean off that round brush from that red paint. Okay, and I'm going to pick up some of that dark red color. And we're going to go ahead and paint just the outline of that red starfish, that dark brown color. And this is going to give the illusion of depth here to our starfish. There you go. Perfect. Then we're going to clean up this brush. Oh, I forgot, actually, we need to add a little bit of a circle in the middle. So we're going to pick up some of that dark red that we created, and we're just going to add a small little circle in the middle. Forgot about that. No biggie. I could always just have left it too. There we go. Okay, so now we clean off the brush again. And now we're going to create some stippled or dots on our starfish, because starfish have those little bumps on them, and we want to create that texture as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to create it a light shade of red, so almost like a really pale pink. So we're going to grab some of our titanium white. We don't need very much. And I'm going to grab just a smidgen of my red, not the dark red. You want your pure cadmium red medium if you have some on your palette. If not, just take some, just a little bit more out of your tube, just a tiny smidgen more. And you're going to create a really nice pale, almost like a pink color. And a little bit more of that white. There we go. Okay, that's good. Now we're going to pick up our brush, and we're just going to pick up some at the tip of our brush, because that's where we need to create those dots. So we're just going to add it on our tip, and make sure your tip is nice and pointed. And then we're just going to dot down. Make some nice small dots on our starfish. All over. You can always just grab more paint. And you don't want to press down too much on the brush, otherwise you're going to get a little bit larger dots. If you want the smaller ones, you just want to literally just dab it down very, very lightly. Perfect. Now that when you're happy with the amount of dots that you've added, we're going to leave that to dry, and we're going to move on to the final step of this painting. So we're just going to wash off that brush to make sure no paint gets stuck on it. All right, so for this step, as I was mentioning at the beginning of this video, we didn't have to worry too much about getting it perfectly straight at the horizon, because we were going to come back at the end and I was going to show you a way to get that line really nice and straight. And also we want to create a little bit of more illusion of depth there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab some of our tape, and we're going to tape it right at our horizon. Now the tape is going to be on the sky portion of it, and we're going to try to get as close as we can to the current horizon. So I'm going to flip it over like that. So you're going to get it as close as you can to the current horizon at that ocean. Like that. And you're going to stick it down. Okay. So now, as I was mentioning earlier on in the video, when things are further away in the distance, not as vibrant of a color. So right now we have that pure ultramarine blue at our horizon, which is still pretty vibrant. So we want to dull that down a bit or desaturate it. And the way to do that is to add a little bit of brown into your mix, and that's going to create a really dull blue, which is going to create an extra illusion of depth at your horizon. So we're just going to grab a little bit of our ultramarine blue again. And we just need a tiny bit. These are the final details. We don't need very much of the paint at this point. Just a tiny bit. I'll add a little more. And we're going to grab some of our burnt umber. And burnt umber is, or any brown, is a great way to create your shadow colors. It desaturates, or it makes the original color not as vibrant, and it kind of dulls it down. So we're just now going to mix that up. And it creates that really dark and deep color, which is going to look fabulous at our horizon. Okay, now we're going to grab our smaller flat brush, make sure it's wet. Okay, and then we're going to pick up some of that dark blue paint on our edge of our brush. And we're going to come here now, and we're going to, with the use of our tape here, we're just going to paint at that horizon and fill in any of that white sky that we have. And you can get some on your ocean as well. And it doesn't have to really be a straight line on the ocean, because it's going to be at the horizon, and that tape is going to give us that nice crisp line. Now we're just going to take off our masking tape to reveal our nice crisp horizon line. Look at that. And there you have it. This easy beach painting is complete. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and give this tropical beach painting a try. And until next time, keep painting!